Hi, welcome to my channel. I'm Natalie and this is Scientology Life After a Cult. Today I'm going to share with you what happened when I got my daughter out of Scientology, which is a cult that I grew up in. I was a second generation Scientologist. My daughter was a third generation Scientologist. And this is the story of how I got her out. It is a question I've gotten a lot from people, not just people who might have family members in Scientology, but other cults as well. When I was a Scientologist and I made the decision to leave, I wanted to leave with as many family members as I possibly could. And if you know anything about Scientology, you know that can be really difficult to do. I made that decision for myself. You might be wondering, like, what did it take for you to finally decide to leave Scientology? I grew up in it. I was in Scientology for 35 years. And then one day, I was in Seattle visiting some friends. And we were at a mall. And I heard a loud bang. And at first I thought a sign had fallen and my brain just wasn't processing. It's like on some level, I knew what that sound was, but my brain didn't want to believe it. And I was with two kids, my goddaughters. And when I heard the second loud bang, I knew what it was. And I knew it meant we needed to hide and seek shelter there in that mall. I knew not to run out towards where the sounds were coming from. Instead, I knew it was probably best to shelter in place. And honestly, I feel like I learned that from watching zombie movies. You just shelter in place, you hide in the back. And I grabbed the girls, the kids that I was with, we went to the back and we hunkered down and waited for help, law enforcement to come. And nobody came right away. But while I was there, crouched down on the floor in the back of a Journey store with two kids, all I could think of is that I could have lost my life today. Something could still happen to me today. And I would have never known what life is like outside of Scientology, what it was like to make my own decisions, decide who I was, listen to the news or read articles that didn't paint Scientology in a favorable light. All these things that weren't allowed. The control was so heavy. But in that moment of being scared, it was the one thing that I couldn't stop thinking about. If something happened to me today, I don't want to leave this earth not knowing what it's like as an adult to be free. And in that moment, that's when I decided that no matter what, I was going to leave Scientology, long as I could take my children with me. Think about the number of spam calls or text messages you receive each day. Have you ever found yourself second guessing whether a message was real or a scam? What about a time when you were waiting for an important call? Did you end up answering every unknown number just in case? I've been there. It is not a good feeling. It does not leave me feeling safe. If you've ever experienced identity theft, think about what happened and how it impacted you. It's happened to me, and the impact was huge. Aura is the sponsor of today's video, and they have services to help prevent this from happening. They have a data broker opt-out where Aura will help remove personal information from data brokers and people search sites that they can sell to identity thieves, scammers, and more. There's identity theft protection. Aura monitors your personal data, including your social security number, across billions of data points like the dark web and public court records to alert you about potential identity theft. Every adult on the account, up to 5, gets $1 million in identity theft insurance to help cover eligible losses and fees, with a total of up to $5 million in coverage. They have antivirus. You can secure your devices from malware, including viruses, spyware, Trojans, ransomware, and more. It's available for Android, PC, and even Mac users. There's a password manager. This is one of my favorite features. Store and access your online passwords securely and conveniently across apps. Plus, Aura will never sell your data to a third party. You'll get 24/7 US-based support around the clock. US fraud specialists are available to help. I get all this in one app at one affordable price. I'm not leaving myself and my family vulnerable to data breaches and brokers. And if you don't want to either, go to aura.com/lifeafteracult. aura.com/lifeafteracult to try 2 weeks for free. That will be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data is exposed. I was married at the time, and leaving Scientology, telling people you want to leave Scientology will get you excommunicated. They'll declare you what's called a suppressive person. And if that happens, you can't have contact with any friends or families that remain in the organization. So what I knew is that I had to do it in such a way that I could somehow communicate with my family. Again, we were 3 generations in Scientology. How do I get them to see what I was seeing? How did I get them to know what I knew, that we needed to leave? I just knew I was going to try. And if I couldn't do it, I was still going to leave, even if it meant leaving with just my kids. It took about 2 years for me to implement this plan, speaking slowly with family members, feeling them out, seeing, okay, if I bring up my doubts, are they going to report me? Because there's a huge snitch culture in Scientology where you're reported by your own family and friends when you're out of pocket, when you are stepping out of line, when you are expressing doubts. And through a lot of patience and a lot of conversations, the first one was my mom. Turns out she was having doubts of her own. And I was able to talk with her and share my doubts and share experiences that my mom didn't know. Things that happened to me earlier in Scientology that I kept from her, even though she was another Scientologist, because we're not allowed. We're not allowed to speak about those things. And I started telling her the truth about what happened to me and different experiences that I'd had that got me to the point of where I really wanted to leave Scientology. And thankfully, she was on that same page. She was able to, once she realized that I was open to leaving, I think she was too, I know she was. It just helped kind of push her over the edge. And this was huge for me because there's so many situations, there's so many times you hear about this. Scientology practices something called disconnection. If you leave Scientology, you get cut off from your friends, from your family. It's similar to the shunning that the Jehovah's Witnesses do. And for a lot of people, they just decide, I don't want to lose my family over this. And they continue to suffer quietly in Scientology. So once I knew that my mom was going to be on board, that was huge for me. And I had a similar conversation with my husband at the time. I was learning the truth about Scientology by going online and reading reports of survivors, whistleblowers, stories they were sharing. Some of this I heard or experienced myself, but a lot of it I didn't know. Because when you're in Scientology, you're not allowed to read or watch anything that is not supporting the narrative in Scientology. Nothing that calls out or exposes the abuses in Scientology. If you do, then you get subjected to a lot of reprogramming and handling by Scientology at your own expense. This is actually something you have to pay for, which is kind of crazy when you think about that you're actually paying for your own reprogramming. But that's how it works. Scientology is very much pay to play. You pay for every service that you do in Scientology, whether it's a course or their version of counseling, which is called Scientology auditing. So once I knew my mom was on board, I started the dialogue with my husband at the time, which I know you might think, well, why would you talk to your mom before your husband? Honestly, because I thought I had a better chance with my mom. I wasn't sure where my husband stood, and I was honestly terrified that he was going to report me to Scientology. And here's what the big problem was. My daughter had turned 18 while she was in Clearwater, Florida, training to be a staff member for Scientology. This meant that they could send her anywhere. She wasn't a minor. I had no legal right or claim to her as her mother anymore. And I knew that if she found out that myself, my mom, my husband at the time, that we all wanted to leave Scientology, she might tell them, and I wouldn't be able to get my daughter back. And by then, my priority was getting my daughter back. And so I thought about what resources I had, how we could go about doing this. I understood fully how Scientology works and what they might do. And I had conversations with the family members that were willing to leave Scientology, and we all decided that until we got my daughter physically back with us in Minnesota, that none of us would say anything that would tip off Scientology and let them know that we wanted to leave. So I played along. I went to Scientology events. I answered their phone calls. It was hard. It was hard to play along once my eyes were open to what Scientology really was. But I knew I had to do it if I wanted to get my daughter back. So my daughter, her name's Shelby, she was training in Clearwater to be a staff member here in the Twin Cities. And I'd had multiple conversations with her on the phone, and I could tell each time someone was listening on the phone or standing right there. Later on, she verified for me that this was true. I could tell by the tone of her voice. I could tell by what she was saying, her uncomfortableness. You know your family, you know your child. So I came up with a plan. And I had to wait, and it was one of the hardest things I ever had to do, knowing what might be happening to my daughter in Clearwater. I decided to take the time and do it right. I had one shot to get her out of there. Her dad had a trip planned to take her to Mexico for Christmas. And this was something that was known before she ever went to Clearwater, before she ever went for her training. She had made sure that Scientology would let her leave when this trip came up around Christmas to go with her dad to Mexico. That was all pre-approved. Well, the plan was when she left to go on that trip, that we would never send her back to Scientology. But we couldn't tell her because the brainwashing and the mind control was so strong that I was afraid that she would tell Scientology, that my own daughter would rat me out. And honestly, she probably would have, because she didn't know any better. She was still under the brainwashing. And I knew if I could get her home, if I could get her around family, if I could get her to a doctor, if I could get her good rest, if I could get her good food, that she would see the light just like I did and other members of my family. So I got the help of some family there in Clearwater. Actually, they weren't going to let her leave to go to Mexico at the last minute. She called me up and I could hear, it sounded like she'd been crying, and she was trying to keep it together and tell me she didn't want to go. She didn't need to go, that she needed to stay and do her training there in Florida. And because I knew Scientology was putting her up to this and listening on the phone, I played it cool. I said, okay, I think your dad's going to be really upset. And by this point, her dad had left Scientology many years before. And I said, it could create a situation with him because this is all paid for. This was approved ahead of time when you arrived. I don't know how this is going to go over. And she was so upset. She was crying, which told me she didn't want to stay there. She wanted to come home, and she wanted to take this trip with her dad. So I had her dad call Scientology and read them the riot act, because he was no longer a Scientologist. He had left a long time ago. Talk about how much money it was, that this was promised. It was approved ahead of time. So he kind of just like shook the cage there. And at the last minute, they were going to let her go. The truth is, Scientology started hearing rumblings about the disaffection, as they call it, between myself, my mom, and other family members. They started to, I think they were kind of getting the idea that we might be leaving. And let's admit it, they were right, we were. So I had a family member go to pick up my daughter the day she was supposed to leave Clearwater to come to Minnesota and then go fly on to Mexico. I had sent my daughter an itinerary for this trip that was fake. It wasn't real. She had no return ticket. If I got her a return ticket, she would have gone back, and then I might not have seen her anymore ever again. I mean, this is what Scientology does. They will separate a family to keep one person in Scientology if that's what it means. So a family member picked her up. She thought she was going straight to the airport to get on a plane to come to Minnesota and then get on a plane and go to Mexico with her dad. And the truth is, the flight I got her was for the next day. I wanted her to have time to decompress a little bit, and I was worried that someone from Scientology would find out and try to go to the airport and get her, because they have a history of doing this. If you work for Scientology as a staff member or a Sea Organization member, the Sea Organization is their elite paramilitary branch, which is what I was in. You sign a billion-year contract. You commit to coming back lifetime after lifetime to serve Scientology and for the aims and the agenda of L. Ron Hubbard. So I was very familiar with what was probably happening to my daughter while she was in Florida in her training. I knew how strict they were. I had been hearing stories about sleep deprivation, food deprivation, and I was in no position to ask her about it as long as somebody was listening on the phone. So I sent a family member to get her. She picked her up. She took her home. My daughter almost immediately fell asleep, is what the family member told me, and she slept for hours. she was told, we'll wake you up when it's time to go to the airport. And we ended up telling her that, oh, actually, we scheduled you for the next day, just in case you didn't leave on time. Because when you want to leave, she has to do what's called a routing form. It's a form that has multiple steps on it that you have to do. All these approvals you have to get just to leave to go see your family. And so my daughter was cool with that. I also had sent a new cell phone, and I said it was for Christmas. The reason I gave my daughter a new cell phone was to make sure Scientology couldn't reach her. They didn't have the new number, and that actually worked out really good. That was a good thing to do because it came in handy later on. So my daughter spends the night with a family member. She goes to the airport the next day with her new cell phone. Nobody from Scientology knows the number. I didn't tell her that that's why I did it. I told her it was for Christmas. Soon as I pick her from the airport, I start telling her the truth. The whistleblowers that had come forward saying that David Miscavige, the head of Scientology, had been beating his staff, physically beating his staff. She didn't believe me. She didn't want to believe it. And then we started talking about Scientology's practice of disconnection, and that if she went back to Florida, if she went back to Scientology, they would force her to disconnect from me and from her family. She didn't think that was true. She said, no, I don't think they would do that. I'm like, well, what's the policy? What is Scientology's policy on this? And she couldn't deny it. If I couldn't be handled, if my family couldn't be handled, as far as Scientology is concerned, she would be what's called a potential trouble source, and she would have to disconnect from all of us. So when she left for Mexico the next day, I didn't have that much time to talk to her, but I told her as much as I possibly could. I probably overdid it. She did seem a little overwhelmed. She wasn't responding a lot. She had been prepared for this. It turns out, I found out later, Scientology did kind of get some rumblings that I was disaffected, as they call it, and I wanted to leave, and they had prepped her for this. So she tried to not listen to it. She goes to Mexico. She gets sleep. She gets good food. She's with family. She's upset because I won't send her back to Clearwater when she gets back. She comes back from Mexico. We start the conversation again. She still doesn't believe me. Little by little, I start asking her about her own experience and find out that she'd been kept up all night, that she was punished for not making sales quotas. Keep in mind, she wasn't there to sell anything. She was there to do very specific training to be a staff member for Scientology here in the Twin Cities. She started sharing how she was sleep deprived, how they were denied food if they didn't make quotas. They had to eat rice and beans. She talked about being kept up all night, being on her feet so much. I took her to a doctor because she had huge varicose veins. And the doctor said, I've not seen this in a young person. Like, what have you been doing? And I found out Scientology had her on her feet working when she was supposed to be there training. Instead, they used her as free labor. The more she started to share about what was really happening to her, the more I was able to get her to see that these were human rights violations. And Scientology, the organization that claims to support human rights and the Declaration of Human Rights, they have this whole declaration that wasn't written by them. I think it was written by the UN. I'm not positive about that. But they promote that they promote human rights. And little by little, I got her to see that what was happening to her was a violation of her basic human rights. And then there was someone else who's a former Scientologist who had done training similar to my daughter. And he sat down and he spoke to her. And they were able to speak the same language because they had done similar training. And little by little, she started coming to see that we were right. We were right about Scientology, and we were right that they might make her try to disconnect from her family. Even when she wanted to go back, I remember telling her, well, you can go back, but you need to make your own money. I'm not paying for your ticket. I'm not going to financially support you while you're there. You know, you're an adult. And she did want to go back for about 3 weeks. She got a job working for my brother-in-law, and we were able to keep her safe there too and away from Scientology. A Scientology staff member still tried to reach out to my daughter and tried to convince her to move out and leave her family and move in with her, the Scientology staff member, so that she wouldn't leave with all of us. And of course, my daughter refused. And I thought it was super shady for that woman to do it, who worked for Scientology. But again, this is what they do. This is why I didn't want my daughter to know that we were leaving before she was physically with me. And little by little, my daughter came around. The mind control started to melt away. She started enjoying life again. She started hanging out with friends, going to movies, doing fun things. She started going to college. She eventually graduated from college, and today she has a master's degree. She's married. She has a daughter. My granddaughter, Mina's 3 years old. She owns her own home. She's got a job that she loves. Life went on for her, and she's doing great. But there are so many people still in Scientology, family members, parents, who have no contact from their kids, who are in Scientology, who are working for Scientology, who are in the Sea organization, who can't call their families without somebody listening, who are experiencing human rights abuses. One of the first things my daughter did, that we both did after she left and we left Scientology, was to start to speak up about it, to share our experiences. And that is the driving reason why now I'm here on YouTube doing daily commentary and videos about cults and Scientology and wanting to educate people of the dangers of this, the signs to spot it, and maybe even through my experience with my family, a way out or a way of dealing with it. With the help of a lot of people, I got 3 generations of my family out of Scientology. It's not easy. Experts say recovering from Scientology can take up to 12 and a half years. And that was kind of my experience. I've been out of Scientology now for 15 years. And at about that 12-year mark is where I really started to feel more myself, where I really felt like Scientology no longer had a hold on me. Cult experts also say that it can take 3 to 4 times as much, 3 to 4 times longer to deprogram or have an intervention with somebody in Scientology than another different cult. All of these things were things that I knew I was up against. But in the end, I succeeded. I got my daughter out of Scientology. I got 3 generations of my family out of Scientology. We got ourselves out of Scientology. And I think that's one of the things I'm probably most proud of and will be for a long time, because I wouldn't have had my family, not the way that I do today. Definitely wouldn't have had my daughter. I can't even think about what might have happened to her if she stayed. She definitely wouldn't have the life that she does today. And for that, I'm happy, I'm thankful, I'm grateful to every person that helped me leave Scientology, that helped her, that helped 3 generations of my family. And again, that's why I do it. That's why I'm here on YouTube. That's why I have my channel. I want to raise awareness about all kinds of cults and how insidious they can be, but also share with people that there's a road out and there's so much life to be had. There is life after a cult. I'm seeing my daughter and my other children live their lives. I'm living my own life along with other family members. So it can be done. It is possible to leave Scientology. It is possible to leave high control groups and find your way out. And if you want to learn more about that, like this video, hit that subscribe. Like I said, I create almost daily content exposing Scientology and other cults. And I'd be happy if you stuck around. In the meantime, I hope you get out there and have an amazing cult-free day.